Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Boy, my God, what an amazing day to be in Wisconsin. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sheriff, for your courage and your service and for that wonderful introduction. It is such a pleasure to be here today at Ripon College. And I have to tell you all, Wisconsin is special for me for a particularly important reason. Way back in 1966, when a very young Dick Cheney and Lynn Cheney were graduate students at the University of Wisconsin, I was born here. And so, go Badgers, exactly. So coming back to Wisconsin always feels to me more than a little bit like coming home. I want you to know the last time that I was here campaigning was 20 years ago, in 2004. And although politics divided us, certainly in that year, we were united in our admiration for the Packers' legendary Bart Starr. And one of the most special and memorable days I had on any campaign was the day that we got to spend with him, which included a personal tour of Lambeau Field. So it's very, very special to be back again. Now, you all know, of course, that here in Ripon, the Republican Party was founded. It was founded in a meeting in 1854 in the Little White Schoolhouse. And it was founded by people who were opposed to slavery. It was that Republican Party, the party of Lincoln and Eisenhower, the party of Reagan and Bush. It's that party that I belonged to my entire life. I volunteered on my first presidential campaign. I already told you how old I am, so I'll tell you. In 1976, when I was 10 years old, and I was sealing envelopes for President Ford's re-election campaign, I cast my first vote ever in 1984 for Ronald Reagan. I served in the State Department in both Bush administrations, and I served in the United States House of Representatives for 3 terms, including as the 3rd highest ranking Republican in House leadership. So, in other words, I was a Republican even before Donald Trump started spray tanning. I am a Ronald Reagan conservative. I believe in limited government. I believe in low taxes. I believe in a strong national defense. And I believe that the private sector is the engine of growth of our economy. I believe that the family, and not the government, is the most important structure in our society. I know that our security and our freedom depend upon a world in which America, with our allies, leads. And above all else, I know that the most conservative of conservative values is fidelity to our Constitution. I tell you, I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year I am proudly casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. but mostly we're not going back. Vice President Harris is standing in the breach at a critical moment in our nation's history. She's working to unite reasonable people from all across the political spectrum. Vice President Harris has dedicated her life to public service. I know that she loves our country, and I know that she will be a president for all Americans. As a conservative, as a patriot, as a mother, as someone who reveres our Constitution, I am honored to join her in this urgent cause. As we meet here today, our republic faces a threat unlike any we have faced before. A former president who attempted to stay in power by unraveling the foundations of our republic, by refusing to accept the lawful results confirmed by dozens of courts of the 2020 election. We cannot turn away from this truth. In this election, putting patriotism ahead of partisanship is not an aspiration. It is our duty. At the very heart of our survival as a republic is the peaceful transition of power. Ronald Reagan said this was nothing short of a miracle, that every 4 or 8 years, the most powerful office in our land, indeed the most powerful office in the world, is passed peacefully to a new president. In the United States of America, violence does not and must never determine who rules us. Voters do. And in this country, under our Constitution, our president has a particular solemn obligation to ensure and guarantee the peaceful transfer of power. Since the beginning of the republic, every president in our history has fulfilled that duty. Every president until Donald Trump. When Donald Trump woke up on the morning of January 6, 2021, his intention, despite having lost the election, was that he would remain president. Rather than accept his loss and concede defeat, he had spent months overseeing a multi-part plan to attempt to seize power and remain in office. He ignored the rulings of the courts. He corruptly pressured state legislatures, including here in Wisconsin, to overturn the results of their elections. He told the Justice Department to lie for him. He conspired to have fake electoral votes cast, and he corruptly pressured his vice president to take illegal and unconstitutional actions. He summoned a mob to Washington, D.C. with his lies, and he sent the armed mob to the United States Capitol in an effort to stop the counting of electoral votes. As the violent mob attacked our Capitol, in Donald Trump's name, as they brutally beat law enforcement officers, as they hunted the vice president and the Speaker of the House, Donald Trump watched the attack on television for hours, Sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office, he refused repeated pleas from his family, from his closest advisors, from the most senior officials in his campaign and in our government to tell the mob to leave. And when Donald Trump finally did speak publicly after hours of violence, after the Capitol had been invaded, he praised the rioters. He did not condemn them. That's who Donald Trump is. Those facts that we know about what Donald Trump did including what he did when our Capitol was under siege, those facts do not come from Donald Trump's political opponents. Those facts come from the people closest to him. They are the ones who testified that Donald Trump did not want to stop the violent attack on our Capitol. When he learned that Vice President Pence was not going to abandon his oath and help Trump seize power, Trump sent out a tweet attacking Pence and further inflaming the mob. One of Trump's aides testified that shortly after that, this aide received a phone call alerting him that the vice president had been evacuated for his own safety from his office off the floor of the Senate. This aide recalled rushing to the dining room to tell Trump, hoping that this information would convince him to take immediate action to ensure the vice president's safety. Instead, after this aide delivered that news, Donald Trump looked up at him and said, "So what?" He said, "So what?" It is Donald Trump's closest aides who also told us this. They said that while the attack on our Capitol was happening, Donald Trump was handed a note informing him that a civilian had been shot at the door to the chamber of the United States House of Representatives. Donald Trump put the note down on the table in front of him, continued to watch the attack on television, and still refused to tell the mob to leave the Capitol. Donald Trump was willing to sacrifice our Capitol to allow law enforcement officers to be beaten and brutalized in his name and to violate the law and the Constitution in order to seize power for himself. I don't care if you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. That is depravity, and we must never become numb to it. Any person who would do these things can never be trusted with power again. We must defeat Donald Trump on November 5th. In that election 20 years ago, when we were campaigning in Wisconsin and all across the country, we were campaigning as compassionate conservatives. What January 6th shows us is that there is not an ounce of compassion in Donald Trump. He is petty, he is vindictive, and he is cruel. And Donald Trump is not fit to lead this good and great nation. Now, sometimes people will say, January 6th wasn't that big a deal. In a time when I have heard many pretty stunning things from Republicans, one of the most stunning was yesterday from your former governor, Scott Walker, who said basically, people are over January 6th. When you think about what that means, that an elected official, a former elected official, is so willing to minimize what happened, to say things like I've heard from others, to say, don't worry, our institutions held that day. We have a responsibility, all of us, to remind people that our institutions don't defend themselves. We, the people, have to do that. We, the people, defend our institutions. And our institutions held on January 6th because there were brave men and women, including elected officials at every level of our government, who did their duty, who stood up for what was right, who resisted Donald Trump's efforts to pressure them to violate their oaths. And our institutions held especially because of the bravery of the men and women in law enforcement and in our military, in our Capitol Police, our Secret Service, the Metropolitan Police. They are the ones who defended our Capitol, our democracy, and our lives. Many of them fought a bloody, hours-long battle on the west front of the Capitol. Go watch the video of that battle. It is sickening. They're the ones who held the line and prevented far worse from happening that day. They are the true profiles in courage. Do not let anyone lie about what happened and what they did. Our institutions also held because of Vice President Mike Pence, who refused to violate his oath to the Constitution. And that is why Mike Pence is not Donald Trump's running mate today. Instead, J.D. Vance is on the ticket. Vance has said, that's true. Vance has said repeatedly that he would have done what Donald Trump wanted, that he would have rejected electoral votes. He would have thrown out the votes of the people of Wisconsin because he didn't like the way that you voted. That is tyranny, and that is disqualifying. History teaches us again and again that democracies can fall. They fall to populists. They fall to strongmen who beguile their fellow citizens with conspiracy theories and false emergencies. As my friend, the late Charles Krauthammer, taught us, the lesson of our history is that the task of merely maintaining strong and sturdy the structures of our constitutional order is unending. It is the continuing and ceaseless work of every generation. And that responsibility now falls on all of us in this election. This great country of ours requires leaders of character. We must choose men and women who have what Abraham Lincoln called a sincere heart. Our nation's second president, John Adams, put it this way. On the first night he ever spent in the White House, he wrote a letter to his wife, Abigail. And his letter included a prayer that is so special, President Kennedy had it engraved in the mantelpiece in the state dining room in the White House. And in his letter, he said this, "May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." Now, I'm confident, just a second, I am confident that John Adams meant women too. In this election, a broad coalition has come together to support Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, we may disagree on some things, but we are bound together by the one thing that matters to us as Americans more than any other, and that's our duty to our Constitution and our belief in the miracle and the blessing of this incredible nation. We have a shared commitment as Americans to ensuring that future generations live in a nation where power is transferred peacefully, where our leaders are men and women of good faith, and where our public servants set aside partisan battles to do what's right for this country. So today I ask all of you here and everyone listening across this great country to join us. I ask you to meet this moment. I ask you to stand in truth, to reject the depraved cruelty of Donald Trump, And I ask you instead to help us elect Kamala Harris for president. I know that President Harris will be able to unite this nation. I know that she will be a president who will defend the rule of law. And I know that she will be a president who can inspire all of our children, and if I might say so, especially our little girls. To do great things. So help us right the ship of our democracy so that history will say of us, when our time of testing came, we did our duty and we prevailed because we loved our country more. And now, it is my great honor to introduce you to our Vice President and the next President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
It is so good to be back in Wisconsin. I thank you, everyone, for being. Please have a seat. I thank you all for being here. But I have to emphasize that every time I come here, and Liz, I was actually a kid here too when my parents were at the University of Wisconsin, so we have that in common as well. In fact, Tony Evers always says when I land, "Welcome home." But I say all that to say every time that I've come here recently, one of the conversations that we have, all of us together, is how much we love our country, and that really is the binding factor in us all being together and taking the time to be together to really just renew and remind everyone of what is at stake, but born out of love that we have this fight. And I want to thank you, Liz Cheney, for reminding us that regardless of party affiliation is a factor that binds us all. And so I thank you for your support and your leadership and your courage. I also want to thank all the other great leaders who are with us today. Governor Tony Evers, where is he? Thank you. Mayor Grant, thank you for the warm welcome. I want to thank Senator Tammy Baldwin, who is traveling around the state, but who I know you will re-elect in November. Thank you, Sheriff Mitchek, for your support and your life of service to the people of Iowa County. And so I do want to say a bit more about Liz Cheney. You all know her leadership, and she has obviously and so importantly been a leader for the people of Wyoming, but she has also been an extraordinary national leader and has served with great honor. And she not only, as she has talked today, recognizes that character is among the most important attributes of leadership, but she also personifies that attribute. And she possesses some of the qualities of character that I most respect in any individual and any leader. Courage, especially at a moment like this, where there are so many powerful forces that have been intent on trying to demean and belittle and make people afraid. And there are many who know it is wrong, and then there are those who have the courage to speak out loudly about it and the conviction to speak truth. And, you know, it is so admirable when anyone does it, and especially when it is difficult to do in an environment such as this. But Liz Cheney really is a leader who puts country above party and above self, a true patriot, and it is my profound honor to have your support. And I also want to thank your father, Vice President Dick Cheney, for his support and what he has done to serve our country. Every endorsement matters, and this endorsement matters a great deal, Liz, and it carries a special significance because, as you said, we may not see eye to eye on every issue, and we are going to get back to a healthy two-party system, I am sure of that, where we will have vigorous debates. And as you said, you may not have supported a Democrat for president before, but as you have also said, we both love our country and we revere our democratic ideals. And we both also believe in the nobility of public service. And we know that our oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America is a sacred oath, an oath that must be honored and must never be violated. And your words today and the reason we are all here today, I think really do underscore perhaps one of the most fundamental questions that is facing the American people in this election. Who will obey that oath? Who will abide by the oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America? I have had the privilege. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution 6 times in my career, including as Vice President, as a United States Senator, and as the top law enforcement officer of the largest state in our country. Responsible for upholding and enforcing the laws of the state and the laws of the United States was the work I did. And I have never wavered in upholding that oath. And I have always executed it faithfully and without reservation. And therein lies the profound difference between Donald Trump and me. He who violated the oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And make no mistake, he who, if given the chance, would violate it again. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. And as you have heard and know, he refused to accept the will of the people and the results of an election that was free and fair. As you have heard, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. He threatened the life of his own vice president, and refused to engage in the peaceful transfer of power. And let us be clear about how he intends to use power if elected again. He has called for jailing journalists, political opponents, anyone he sees and deems as being an enemy. He has pledged to destroy the independence of the Department of Justice. And he called for deploying our active duty military against our own citizens. Well, I believe you and my running mates both. Well, listen, I believe that anyone who recklessly tramples on our democratic values, as Donald Trump has, anyone who has actively and violently obstructed the will of the people and the peaceful transfer of power, as Donald Trump has, anyone who has called for, I quote, termination of the Constitution of the United States, as Donald Trump has, must never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again. Never again. And the tragic truth that we are facing in this election for President of the United States is that there is actually an honest question about whether one of the candidates will uphold the oath to the Constitution of the United States. That is the tragic truth of this election, that this is actually an honest question that we are having as Americans. And I know the vast majority of us agree that upholding the Constitution must be a basic requirement we expect of anyone seeking the highest office in the land. I know the vast majority of us, regardless of your political party, agree we must hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. And if you share that view, no matter your political party, there is a place for you with us and in this campaign, because those principles, I know, unite us across party lines. And in this election, I take seriously my pledge to be a president for all Americans. My entire career, I've only had one client, the people. And when I say that, I mean all the people, not just those who share my party affiliation. Through all my decades in law enforcement, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only question I ever asked was, are you okay? And that is the kind of president we deserve, and I pledge to you that is the kind of president I will be. Because the President of the United States must not look at our country through the narrow lens of ideology or petty partisanship or self-interest. The President of the United States must not look at our country as an instrument for their own ambitions. Our nation is not some spoil to be won. The United States of America is the greatest idea humanity ever devised. The nation that inspired the world to believe in the possibilities of a representative government. And so in the face of those who would endanger our magnificent experiment, people of every party must stand together. And let me be clear, democracy and freedom are not only at stake here at home, they are also at stake around the world. As President of the United States, I will strengthen, not abdicate, America's global leadership. Last week, I met with Ukraine's President Zelensky. And the message I delivered was the same message I've shared with him every time I've seen him. I stand with Ukraine, and I always will. And I told him, as I have before, I want Ukraine to prevail. By contrast, in our debate, Donald Trump couldn't even bring himself to say he wanted Ukraine to win the war. Couldn't even bring himself to say that. A war that Putin, a brutal dictator, launched against a free and independent people. Trump wants to force Ukraine to give up its sovereign territory, a bedrock principle upon which we stand and fight for. And you know who else wants them to give up their sovereign? Absolutely, territory? Putin. Putin. And that's not a plan for peace. It's a plan for surrender. Well, I believe that in the global struggle between tyranny and democracy, the President of the United States must always be on the side of freedom. So we are gathered here today in Ripon, not far, as the Congresswoman mentioned, from a small building where the Republican Party was born in 1854. Liz Cheney stands in the finest tradition of its leaders. And if people across Wisconsin and our nation are willing to do what Liz is doing, to stand up for the rule of law, for our democratic ideals, and the Constitution of the United States, then together I know we can chart a new way forward, not as members of any one party, but as Americans. Americans who are united in our devotion to the country we love. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all. Well, it's good to be back in Detroit, and so we're here back today to thank all the folks for the work that they are doing to help organize, register people to vote, and get them out to vote. Today, early voting begins in Detroit. So it is good to be back here, and obviously to be in a great American city, and to applaud it for being just that, a great American city with a lot of hardworking folks who have grit and ambition and deserve to be respected for all of that. And then on Monday, I will be headed to Pennsylvania, to Michigan and Wisconsin to spend some time with a great American leader, Liz Cheney, and talk with folks about why it's important for us to put country before party and value the very important foundational principles that we stand on in terms particular, respecting and upholding the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law, and the importance of having a president in the White House who actually understands their job and is fit to serve. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, here we go. Sit back. We got 40 minutes, and we're going to move quick. Okay? So I want this to be like a kitchen table. Like, just think that we're sitting around the kitchen table and we're jamming about all kinds of stuff. That's the feeling I want to have at this.
This is like a Kennedy family kitchen table. Yeah. But most people don't have this many.
That's right. It's raucous. It's hot, but it's fun. That's what it's going to be like. So this, as I was saying before both of you walked out, this is historic. So I hope everybody takes this in for a minute. To have a leader of the Republican Party and the Vice President of the United States. So let me begin with you, Madam Vice President. Did you ever think in your wildest dreams that you would be running for president alongside Liz Cheney, who'd be advocating for you, campaigning for you, a member of an opposing party, putting herself on the line for you?
So let me just start by thanking everyone. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to be here and have this conversation. And I think we are all here together because we have many things in common. First and foremost, we love our country. Ooh. We love our country. You know, so Maria, perhaps not, but
perhaps
not. But let me say this. So you mentioned, you know, my background. So I started my career as a prosecutor. And most of my career has been spent outside of Washington, D.C., not in Washington, D.C. And for most of my career, let me just tell you, I never once asked a victim of crime, a witness, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? Never. It would have even occurred to me to ask that. What I did ask everyone, are you okay? And when I think then about what is at stake in this election, I think that's the biggest question. And it is a moment where, born out of our love of our country, born out of, for me, having taken the oath of office to the Constitution of the United States at least 6 times, I believe what is at stake in this election is so fundamental for us as Americans. And it is about, do we take seriously the importance of a president who obeys the oath to be loyal to the Constitution of the United States? Do we prioritize a president of the United States who cares about rule of law, much less the spirit with which they approach this most powerful position? There's so much about this last era. When I talk about turn the page, that's what I'm referring to, like the last decade, that has been about some powerful forces suggesting that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of what I think most of us believe, regardless of your party affiliation, that the real measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. And so, for that reason, I'm not surprised that Liz Cheney and I are on the same stage 15 days before the election.
Okay. You know? Well, maybe you're not surprised, but I'm surprised. And I think a lot of people are surprised. So I want to know, are you surprised? Are you surprised that you're out here campaigning for a Democrat, campaigning for Kamala Harris against the party that you've been a part of your entire life?
You know, what I would say, first of all, is we all know, everyone who watched January 6th, knows, you know, what Donald Trump is willing to do. He lost the election. He tried to overturn it and seize power. And then he sat in his dining room and he watched the attack on television. He watched it. People pleaded with him to tell the mob to leave, and he wouldn't. And he watched law enforcement officers be brutally beaten. He watched it. That's a depravity that, to me, and you know, I think to anyone who's taken the oath of office, makes someone absolutely unfit ever to be president again. Now, I could have just said, you know, I'm going to do everything I can to work against Donald Trump. And there are a lot of Republicans who have said that. I have decided, and I am very proud and I'm honored to have made the decision to endorse Vice President Harris. And I have gotten to spend time with Vice President Harris. I have had the chance to talk with her about how important it is that we have two strong parties in our country, about the kind of president that I know she'll be. And I think all of us, it doesn't matter what party you're in, we all know this is a good and an honorable and a great nation. And we have to have leaders. You might say, I'm not going to agree on every issue, but we have to have leaders who take that seriously. We have to have leaders who are going to be sincere. And as a mother, I want my children to know that there is someone sitting in the Oval Office that they can look up to, someone who can be a role model. And I'm incredibly proud, and I know that Vice President Harris will be that.
Right. And Maria, let me just add one thing also, because it bears repeating. I have seen a lot of Republicans go up to Liz Cheney and thank her. And they may not be doing it publicly. They may not be doing it publicly because I think she has shown, to your point, extraordinary courage, especially in this environment post-January 6th, where there's something, an undercurrent that is violent in terms of the language and the tenor. And for her to show the courage she has shown is extraordinary. But I've seen Republicans come up to her, and from my vantage point, she's actually not alone.
And so I want to talk about that because there are a lot of people who are scared to vote for you, scared about the environment, scared to talk about politics. How scary was it for you personally to make this decision? What has been the personal cost for you to do so?
It was not, it wasn't scary at all in terms of making this decision. Because when I look at the nature of the threat that Donald Trump poses, and look, Donald Trump is doing everything he can to try to get people to forget about what he did on January 6th. And when you think about that level of instability, the level of erratic decision-making, the misogyny, that's not someone that you can entrust with the power of the Oval Office. And so I think that we are facing a choice in this election. It's not about party. It's about right and wrong. And I certainly have many Republicans who will say to me, I can't be public. They do worry about a whole range of things, including violence, but they'll do the right thing. And I would just remind people, if you're at all concerned, you can vote your conscience and not ever have to say a word to anybody. And there will be millions of Republicans who do that on November 5th. Vote for Vice President Harris.
I love that you said you weren't scared at all, because most people will talk today about, I'm afraid to say anything on social media. I'm afraid to speak in my place of worship. I'm afraid to speak where I work. I'm afraid. How are you not afraid?
Well, I think that the point you're making is a really important one. Think about what's happened in our country. The level of vicious, vitriolic attack. When Donald Trump says that his political opponents are the enemy within, and when he contemplates deploying force against them, the response that we all have should not be to be so afraid we don't act. It should be vote him out, defeat him, vote for Vice President Harris.
And Maria, I'm going to add to that.
Yeah.
I would add to that an additional point, which is, and don't think it's a sick sense of humor and relegate it to simply being that. I've said many times, I do believe Donald Trump to be an unserious man, but the consequences of him ever being in the White House again are brutally serious. And take it from the people who know him best. His former chief of staff, when he was president, 2 former defense secretaries, his national security advisor, and of course his vice president, who have all in one way or another used the word that he is unfit to be president again and is dangerous. Listen to the report that what his former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a general, said about him, that he is fascist to the core. And these are people who were in his administration, who worked closely with him in the Oval Office and the Situation Room. And so I would caution us also to, because some people find it humorous what he says and think it's just silly, but understand how brutally serious it is. Well, the courts will take care of that. We'll take care of November. Yes. We'll take care of November. But it is brutally serious because, to the Congresswoman's point, anyone who has openly said, as he has, that he would terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again.
So, Madam Vice President, I wanted to ask you, several people that I talked to in preparation for this, when I asked them, they said, well, I want to vote for the Vice President, but I just don't feel like I know her. I don't know enough about her. I see the ads, but I don't have a feel for her. What are 3 things you can tell this audience about you that aren't in your ads, that people aren't telling people on the robocalls, that perhaps they just wouldn't know, that might give them a feeling for who you are as a woman?
How much time do we have?
We're at the kitchen table.
I have lived a full life. I am a wife, I am a mother, I am a sister, I am a godmother, I love to cook. I started my career as a prosecutor. In large part, there are many reasons, but one very fundamental is when I was young, one of my best friends in high school, I learned, was being molested by her stepfather. And I told her when I learned she had to come live with us. I talked to my mother about it. Of course she has to come live with us, and she did. And I decided I wanted to take on a career and a life that was about protecting the most vulnerable. I served as Attorney General of California 2 terms. I was the top law enforcement officer of the biggest state in the country. And doing that work, it included prosecuting transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. I did the work of taking on the big banks during the foreclosure crisis and delivered $20 billion for homeowners who had been targeted with predatory lending practices. I took on the big pharmaceutical companies on behalf of consumers. As Vice President of the United States, my priorities have been many, including, to your point, the work that you and I have done over the years, focusing on women's health. One of my priorities has been maternal mortality. But I have only had one client in my career, the people. And my belief is that there is great nobility in public service if one understands that they hold the office in the public trust. It is not about personal power. It is about what you can do that lifts up the condition of people. And there is so much about how I think about my responsibility, and I'm here to ask for your vote, is that I intend to be a president for all Americans, understanding that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And this era that was kind of initiated by Donald Trump has not only been exhausting, it has been harmful to us as a nation. The notion that a president of the United States would encourage Americans to point fingers at each other, that there would be a suggestion that we are a divided country, that instead of knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us. I have, as Vice President, met over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings. My most recent overseas trips as Vice President, which were relatively close to then the election, our allies have expressed real concern. I've shared this before, but when we walk in a room representing the United States of America, we should walk in that room, especially leaders, chin up, shoulders back, knowing that we have the self-appointed and earned authority to talk about the importance of democracy and rule of law. But the thing about being a role model, this is all role models who are here, people watch what you do to see if it matches up to what you say. People around the world are watching this election, I promise you. And my one fear I have is I hope and I pray that we, the American people, understand not only what is at stake for us in this election, but how much we mean to the rest of the world. There is so much at stake in this election.
Liz Cheney, tell us real quick, I want to get to our first question, but you've been traveling with the Vice President, you've been working with her, you've been spending human time with her. Tell the audience what you see that perhaps the camera doesn't get or the ads don't get, so that they can get a sense of her that you have.
Well, I think that what I can tell you is that what the Vice President is saying about wanting to be a president for all Americans, caring deeply about this country, those are things that come across very, very clearly and very directly. And look, I'm a conservative. The very first campaign I ever volunteered in was for President Gerald Ford in 1976. And ever since then, I have been voting for Republicans. I've never voted for a Democrat. And,
wow. And
so the fact that I believe so strongly that in this election, we need to elect the person who is the responsible adult. And we need... And there is a lot, both parties do it. There is a lot of vilification that goes on.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for people to think very carefully about the power that we're going to invest in the President of the United States and what it would mean to give that power to Donald Trump. Don't take my word for who he is. Listen to him every day. Look at what he did. Remember that the people, as the Vice President said, who are opposing him are the people who know him best, the people who worked most closely with him. And so I would just say I know that the Vice President has had the range of experience, as Vice President, as Senator, as Attorney General of California. She is supremely qualified to be President of the United States. I think sometimes there are some men who suggest that she's not, but if you look at her qualifications, there's no question. And that she's somebody that I know I can count on who will put the good of this country first. There's just no question.
Okay. I want to go over here to Cecilia Borland. Can you stand up? You have a question. Cecilia grew up in Birmingham, Michigan, which was a Republican stronghold as she grew up. She now lives with her husband. They're raising 2 children in Berkeley, Michigan, and she's here with a question for the Vice President.
Thank you both for coming to Michigan today for this important event. I'd like to start by saying personally, thank you, Representative Cheney, to you and your father for exemplifying putting country over party. And Madam Vice President, I hope you had a wonderful birthday yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you.
From the shootings at Oxford High School to my alma mater, Michigan State University, to an attack at a kid's splash pad this summer, just a few miles away from here, the issue of gun violence hits very close to home for our community. Just yesterday, I learned from our school district that my preschooler will be going through his first active shooter drill this week.
Yeah.
As a gun violence survivor and mother of 2 young children, The issue of gun violence and the safety of my children in their schools and in our community is my top priority. Madam Vice President, if you are elected president and there is a Republican majority in Congress, how will you work with them to make impactful and immediate progress around gun violence, especially in our children's schools?
Right. Thank you, Cecilia. And thank you for your courage to speak up about this. So, well, we have done it actually in the last 4 years. We had a bipartisan group of folks in Congress who came together for the Safer Communities Act, which is the first meaningful piece of gun safety legislation in 30 years. And so it's a good step, and it really does tell us that we have a will within the United States Congress to work in a bipartisan way. And then Congresswoman Cheney was one of those Republicans that actually voted for it. This is how I think of the issue, and it is through the lens of many experiences, including I'm so sorry about your kids going through active shooter drills. Our kids did. It's traumatic. That our children, growing up, I'll speak for myself, we had fire drills. Yeah. Right? Our children are now learning how to keep themselves safe if there's an active shooter at their school. I did a tour last year of colleges with college-aged kids, so I also did some trade schools. And I would ask the auditorium would be packed, college-age kids, and I'd ask them, raise your hand if at any point between kindergarten and 12th grade you had to endure an active shooter drill. Almost every hand went up. Our kids are growing up where they are learning that they may be unsafe in the classroom, where they should be absorbing the wonders of the world. One kid said to me, we were talking about this, and said to me, that's why I don't like going to fifth period. I said, why, sweetheart? Why don't you like going to fifth period? Because in that classroom, there's no closet in which to hide. So when we think of this issue, we must also consider the trauma, that is, the direct trauma for those who have been directly affected by gun violence, including that to our kids who are in schools across our country doing this, not to mention their teachers who want to teach and not also have to worry about, will they be able to physically protect a child from a bullet? Here's how I think about it in terms of the macro point. We have been pushing as a country, I think, a false choice that suggests you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away. And that's a false choice. I'm in favor of the Second Amendment. I have talked about the fact both Tim Walz and I are gun owners. I also believe we need reasonable gun safety laws, assault weapons bans, red flag laws, universal background checks. And reports say that the majority of NRA members agree on, for example, universal background checks. What is a universal background check? It's just common sense. Here's what it is. You just might want to know, before someone can buy a lethal weapon, whether they've been found by a court to be a danger to themselves or others. You just might want to know. It's common sense. We need common sense gun safety laws, and I will continue, I've done it throughout my career, work with all of our colleagues across the aisle, and I know that we can make progress. But this is not, I'm not trying to take anybody's guns away from them, but we need reasonable gun safety laws.
Okay, I want to come back to the issue of public safety in a minute, but first we want to go to Martin. Thank you, Cecilia, very much. Martin Hauerlich, he's a former Republican member of the Michigan House of Representatives, and he's here with a question about national security.
Well, thank both of you for being here this afternoon. I really appreciate your coming to the state of Michigan to be here. I would like to ask, what can the U.S. do politically, economically, or militarily to deter Russia from continuing its war on the independent nation of Ukraine while simultaneously strengthening our own U.S. security interests?
Thank you, Martin.
Go ahead.
So I was actually in Munich at the Munich Security Conference delivering a speech when I first met with President Zelensky of Ukraine and it was just days before Russia invaded. I've now met with President Zelensky, I think, 7 times, because the United States has rightly taken a position as a leader, a global leader on international rules and norms, that we must stand in support of one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of protecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, the importance of standing strong in opposition to the notion that, in this case, Russia would attempt to change borders by force, to invade another nation, a sovereign nation, by force. And sadly, there is a huge difference between my opponent and me on this very fundamental issue. Back to the conversation about, there was a time when there was a phrase that I'll paraphrase, that basically politics ends at the sea line, at the boundaries of our country, that there are certain things, in particular matters of national security, where it's not about partisanship, it's about where should America stand in terms of supporting our allies and standing for certain principles. I'll give you as a point of reference for me in terms of how I feel about this on the partisan issue. For the 4 years that I was in the United States Senate, my favorite committee was the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I served on that committee, and we would meet in a room that's called a SCIF, and it's basically it's a very secure room. No press, with all due respect, is allowed in, no cameras. Everyone has to leave their cell phone outside. It's a bipartisan committee, and we would go in that room and receive classified information from America's intelligence community, sometimes our military leaders, about hotspots around the world and threats to our national security. And when we went in that room, and this is why it was my favorite committee, people would take off their suit jacket, roll up their sleeves, have a cup of coffee on the table. And we weren't Democrats or Republicans. We were Americans. And that is so important on a number of issues we are discussing this afternoon, but in particular on national security. My opponent, however, has made it a thing of his to admire dictators and autocrats around the world. He exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un, remember that? He has openly praised the president of Russia. Most recently, the report is, in the height of COVID. Remember, everyone was scrambling to get their hands on COVID tests? Remember when Americans were dying by the hundreds every day, and Donald Trump secretly sent COVID tests to the president of Russia for his personal use? He has said, Donald Trump, I will solve the matter of Ukraine and Russia in a day. Read through and understand what he is saying. He would surrender. He would have Ukraine surrender its fight against an aggressor, violating its sovereignty. If Donald Trump were president, Vladimir Putin will be sitting in Kyiv and understand what that would mean for America and our standing around the world. But thankfully, there has been bipartisan support, and to your point of where you stand on this very fundamental issue. But this is a very vivid example of what is at stake in this election, because Donald Trump has been very clear. He would give away the shop. He has been manipulated and is so clearly able to be manipulated by favor and flattery, including from dictators and autocrats around the world. And America knows that that is not how we stand. That is not how we fight. We fight in favor of our strength and our role as a leader in bringing the allies together and standing for foundational and fundamental principles.
Congressman Cheney. I know kind of the issue of national security is one of the big reasons you're here and supporting the vice president. Can you expand on that answer and add your thoughts to it?
Yeah, I think that if you look at where the Republican Party is today, There's been a really dangerous embrace of isolationism, a dangerous embrace of tyrants. The president, even just today, he heaps praise on the world's most evil people while he attacks, with venom his political opponents here at home. And, the reality is that since the end of World War II, America has led, and we've led, and that has been necessary to defend our freedom. And we can't do it by ourselves, though. We need our allies. And when Donald Trump says that he's going to withdraw from NATO, when he invites Vladimir Putin to invade NATO, when he suggests that it is Zelensky's fault that Ukraine was invaded, I mean, that is for anybody who is a Republican who is thinking that, they might vote for Donald Trump because of national security policy. I ask you, please, please study his national security policy. Not only is it not Republican, it's dangerous. And without allies, America will find our very freedom and security challenged and threatened. And one final point on this, don't think that Congress can stop him. Yeah. People say, well, you know what, he can't really do the worst, because Congress will step in. All he has to do is what he's doing, is say, I won't fulfill our NATO treaty obligations. And NATO begins to unravel. So it is an incredibly dangerous thing to think about a foreign policy, a national security policy led by somebody who is as unstable as Donald Trump is, and it's a risk we just simply can't take as a nation.
And I'm going to add for emphasis that let's also be clear about, on this subject specifically of Ukraine, Donald Trump's approach would be to surrender. Understand what that would mean. That is signaling to the president of Russia he can get away with what he has done. Understand, look at the map. Poland would be next. NATO, our allies, are the reason that they have been so thankful for the position of strength we have taken in bringing the allies together, is because they are fully aware of and remember, to the Congresswoman's point, World War II. Remember, this concept of isolation, we were once there as a nation, and then Pearl Harbor happened. Let's remember recent history. Europe remembers it well. Then when we got attacked, Pearl Harbor, we jumped in. And it is because America jumped in that we were ultimately able to win that war. And it should be a constant reminder to us, we have to remember history, that isolationism, which is exactly what Donald Trump is pushing, pull out of NATO, abandon our friends, isolationism is not insulation. It is not insulation. It will not insulate us from harm in terms of our national security. So I say that to emphasize a point that the Congresswoman made, and the other point I'd make is also check out where he's been on how he thinks about America's military and service members. One of the great, great American heroes of prisoner of war, John McCain. Remember how he talked about John McCain? He said he didn't like him because he got caught. You look, he's called members of our military suckers and losers. And then look at how some of the highest ranking members of our military, including what I mentioned earlier, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a dedicated member, leader in America's military, how he has assessed Donald Trump. Fascism to his core. So
there are your talking points for the kitchen table. Our final question is from Courtney. Courtney, can you stand? Courtney Cabrera Agruza is a wife, a mom, an attorney, and she's a proud Chaldean, and she is here with a question. Courtney.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Madam Vice President Harris and Representative Cheney. My name is Courtney Kabara Agrusa, and I am a first-generation Chaldean American. Chaldeans are indigenous Iraqis who are Catholic, and we are predominantly in the Metro Detroit area. Chaldeans are a very close-knit community, but the recent political climate has really begun to divide us. While I know that you have discussed several bipartisan proposals over the course of your campaign, what would you say to people like myself who are part of these traditionally conservative communities who want to move forward but are feeling the pressures of the political divide?
Thank you. And I've actually met with members and leaders in the Chaldean community, and thank you for being here. You know, I think that there is something at stake that is about core values as well as what is at stake in terms of the risk and the danger. And I would offer you an example of what I think would be an important issue that would affect the Chaldean community and all Americans. For example, the issue of how we think about healthcare in America. So I know enough about the culture and to know that it is reflective of who we are as Americans in general. We respect our elders. We take care of them. So I will share with you a specific proposal that is an extension of how I think about things. Personal story, I took care of my mother when she was sick. And for anyone taking care of or who has taken care of an elder relative, you know what that is. It's about trying to cook something they feel like eating. It is trying to find clothes that don't irritate their skin or help them put on a sweater. It's about trying to figure out something you can say that will bring a smile to their face or make them laugh. It's about dignity. And we now have, in particular in our country, a lot of people doing that and also raising young kids. We call them the sandwich generation, right in the middle. It's a lot. And the way the system currently works, well, God willing, you may have enough resources, you can hire somebody to come in and help. If not, you may have to spend down all of your savings to be able to qualify for Medicaid. Or you may have to quit your job to be able to do what you need to do to take care of your children and take care of your older relative. That's just not right, and it's not fair. So part of my proposal and the plan is that we're going to now reconfigure so that Medicare covers home health care for our seniors, right? It's about dignity. So in addition to everything that we've discussed already about national security, what is at stake? Something like this, because I absolutely do believe America is ready for a new generation of leadership that is taking on issues clear-eyed about what is going on that affects everybody, doesn't matter their political party, issues that are fundamentally about dignity, also about economic issues, and taking it on in a way that we relieve the American people of the burdens that get in the way of productivity and a certain quality of life. And this is one example of that. I believe we need to have an economy that I call an opportunity economy, where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, not just get by, but get ahead. And this is one example I would offer under the broader point, which is about let's move forward, taking on problems from a common sense approach that is about just practical work. Look, I am a capitalist. I am a pragmatic capitalist. I will work as I have with the private sector. I believe we have to invest in America's economy and America's industry and America's entrepreneurs. And we can at the same time take care of those that are the most in need of just a little support to be able to not just get by, but get ahead.
Thank you, Courtney. Liz, I just want to, we have 2 minutes left. And when you hear the phrase, a new way forward, when you hear country over party, what does that mean to you? We're 2 weeks out. What does a new way forward mean for families like everybody here, for your children, my children, everybody's children, young men?
Yeah.
What is it like?
I think that, we're at a moment now where when you think about America and the beacon of hope that we have been for so many years, for so many communities, also how tremendously enriched we have been by communities, immigrants who want to come here and build a life, all of that depends upon fundamentally defending the rule of law, fundamentally defending our Constitution. That's what makes all of our opportunity and our freedom possible. And at the same time that we're that beacon for the world, you know, it's also because we're a good nation.
Yeah.
And because, you know, when you look at who our leader is going to be, what Donald Trump represents is in many ways just cruel, and not the kind of dignity and the kind of person that we all want to be able to look up to. But what I would say is that if people are uncertain, if people are thinking, well, you know, I'm a conservative, I don't know that I can support Vice President Harris, I would say, I don't know if anybody's more conservative than I am. and I understand the most conservative value there is to defend the Constitution. And if we don't come together to do that, then and so just to finish that, I would say, to me, a new way forward is this. It's what you're seeing up here. It's having a president who will listen, having a president who will say, I'm not, you know, necessarily sure I agree with you on this issue or that issue, but let's talk about it. Why do you want, you know, that policy? Why do you believe that? Someone who is willing to honor and respect all perspectives and points of views. And there's only one candidate in this race who does that, and that's Vice President Harris.
In fact, a lot of polling of undecided voters who call themselves the exhausted majority said, I just want leaders who listen to one another. I just want leaders who speak respectfully to one another. I want to see decency. I want to see people I can look up to. And unfortunately, that's considered a new way forward, as Representative Cheney.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's make that a way forward. The final word, Madam Vice President, you know, everybody I talk to says, you know, I have to turn off the news. I can't read anything. I'm meditating. I'm doing yoga. I'm so anxious. I just don't even know. I'm eating gummies, all kinds of things, you know. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Not eating gummies.
Okay, we got that clear. But how do you, how do you handle this, the anxiety, the stress, the turmoil? Everybody's freaked out. I talked to the gentleman up there. He's like, I'm so scared. A woman's like, I'm so anxious. I can't sleep. Do you sleep?
You know, I wake up in the middle of the night usually these days, so to be honest with you, but I work out every morning. I think that's really important to just kind of, you know, mind, body, and spirit. But let me just say this.
No, say more about that.
But I will. I work out. I try to eat well. You know, I love my family, and I make sure that I talk to the kids and my husband every day. Doug and I have been kind of, traveling. We're trying to cover a lot of ground, so we're not with each other every day these days. But my family grounds me in every way. But if I can just speak to what people are feeling. We cannot despair. We cannot despair. You know, the nature of a democracy is such that I think there's a duality. On the one hand, there's an incredible strength when our democracy is intact. An incredible strength in what it does to protect the freedoms and rights of its people. Oh, there's great strength in that. And it is very fragile. It is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. And so that's the moment we're in. And I say do not despair, because in a democracy, as long as we can keep it in our democracy, the people, every individual has the power
to make a decision about what this will be. And so let's not feel powerless. Let's not let and I get it, overwhelming nature of this all make us feel powerless, because then we have been defeated. And that's not our character as the American people. We are not one to be defeated. We rise to a moment, and we stand on broad shoulders of people who have fought this fight before for our country. And in many ways, let us look at the challenge then that we are being presented and not be overwhelmed by it. The baton is now in our hands to fight for, not against, but for this country we love. That's what we have the power to do. So let's own that. Dare I say, be joyful in what we will do in the process of owning that, which is knowing that we can and will build community and coalitions and remind people that we're all in this together. Let's not let the overwhelming nature of this strip us of our strength. That's how I feel about this. That's how I feel about this.
So I want to thank everybody here. You heard from the Vice President, from Congresswoman Cheney, do not despair. I think you got a great glimpse into who this woman is, what brings them together, why they're here, why they want to earn your vote, why they wanted to speak with you today. And I want to leave you with this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that I think speaks to this moment. It says, "Whatever course you decide upon, there is always someone to tell you that you're wrong. There are always difficulties arising which tempt you to believe that your critics are right. To map out a course of action and follow it to the end requires great courage." So I leave you with that. All of you are courageous people. Do not despair. Thank you so much for spending your time. Bravo.
Audience members showing me up. That's tough. Okay, so I've got to start with the thing that brings us here today, because I've got to say, it is unusual for somebody who was as high up in the Republican leadership as Liz Cheney was to be out here campaigning with the Democratic nominee for president. And so maybe why don't both of you tell us, but you start, you've actually marshaled unprecedented support from Republicans in this election. Why do you think that is?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being here, for your work, and the Congresswoman. Thank you. I have said before, and it must be repeated each time, there are moments in the history of our country which challenge us, each of us, to really decide, do we stand for those things that we talk about, including particular country over party. And you have been extraordinarily courageous in the way that you have done it, and I thank you for that. So, I have, in my career now, whether it was as the elected district attorney, elected attorney general, and then elected United States Senator, and of course now Vice President, I've counted that I have taken the oath of office 6 times. And for the elected leaders here, we know it is an oath that one must take sincerely and unequivocally, which is an oath, among other things, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and to understand what those principles represent and what they require of the individual who holds the office in the public trust. And let's not undervalue that point as well. It is not about the individual. It is not about what is in their personal interest. It is about what is for and in the spirit of the public good. And this is a moment in this election that presents a real contrast among how I, as one of the two nominees, and my opponent, the former president, think of that duty. And it is a duty, by the way. There are certain things in our lives that we have the choice if we feel like it. And then there are certain things that are just fundamentally a duty. Like to raise our children, things of that nature. It is a duty to take seriously that oath and do it for the sake of the public good and in the public trust. And I think that this moment, with the choice that the American people have in this election in 2 weeks and 1 day, this election is presenting, for the first time probably in certainly recent history, a very clear choice and difference between the two nominees. And I think that is what, as much as anything, is bringing us as Americans together, who are understanding that we cannot, with such fundamental stakes being presented, afford to be mired in ideological differences without really staking our claim to the most fundamental ideals upon which our country stands.
Thank you. And, Congresswoman Cheney, it's sort of the same question to you, but I gotta ask, it's one thing for Republicans to sign a letter. We've seen that Vice President Harris has been endorsed by 200 Republicans in the national security space, all kinds of people from George W. Bush's administration. There's been a lot of people who'll sign letters, and maybe they'll go on TV, they'll release a statement. I was just with Republican Congressman Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman here from the state. He voted for you in his early voting. But you were out here campaigning. You were out here holding events. So talk about why it's been so important to you to be as involved as you are in getting Vice President Harris elected.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for the question, and it's an honor to be here today with you, Madam Vice President. For me, every single thing in my experience and in my background has played a part in my decision to endorse Vice President Harris. That begins with the fact that I'm a conservative. And I know that the most conservative of all conservative principles is being faithful to the Constitution. And you have to choose in this race between someone who has been faithful to the Constitution, who will be faithful, and Donald Trump, who, it's not just us predicting how he will act. We watched what he did after the last election. We watched what he did on January 6th. Coming to this as someone who's been a lifelong Republican, a lifelong conservative, also as someone I spent time working overseas before I was elected to Congress, and I've spent time working in countries where people aren't free and where people are struggling for their freedom, and I know how quickly democracies can unravel. And I know that as Americans, we can become accustomed to thinking, well, we don't have to worry about that here. But I tell you, again, as someone who has seen firsthand how quickly it can happen, that is what's on the ballot. It's absolutely what's on the ballot. I also, I come to this decision as a mother. I have 5 children, and there was a moment right after January 6th when my husband and I were having dinner with our 2 youngest, our 2 sons, and I looked across the table at my young sons, and I thought to myself, in the aftermath of the attack on the Capitol, are they going to grow up in a country where we don't have to worry about the peaceful transfer of power? Are they going to grow up in a country where that is guaranteed? And I believe that every one of us in this election has a duty and an obligation to do what we know is right for the country, and that's to support Vice President Harris. So I'm very honored to be here.
If I can just echo the Congresswoman's point. So I've now, as Vice President, met over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers,
many of them multiple times, to the point we're on a first-name basis. And the last few times that I've seen them in the relative eve of this election, they are very concerned, our allies. Because as you know, when we walk in those rooms around the world representing the United States of America, we have traditionally been able to walk in those rooms, chin up, shoulders back, with the self-appointed and earned authority to talk about the importance of democracy and rule of law. But as all the role models here know, as a role model, people watch what you do to see if it lines up with what you say. People around the world are watching this. And I tell you, sometimes I do fret a bit about whether we as Americans truly understand how important we are to the world. I hope everyone does really understand that we represent something, imperfect though we certainly are, flawed though we may be. We represent, in terms of our ideals, the basis of our Constitution, we represent a gold standard. And when we have someone who has been president, who wants to be president again, who is saying he would be dictator on day one, would weaponize our Department of Justice, one of the principles of our democracy is that we say we have a justice system that is blind, that is not punitive against one's enemies. They are watching. So this is about direct impact on the American people, and it most certainly will impact people around the world.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up, and I as a follow-up, I would just ask Congresswoman Cheney, too, we live in a dangerous time. I mean, I think Americans are watching what's happening overseas, in Ukraine, in Israel. Republicans, we used to be the party that would be on the side of our Democratic allies like Ukraine. Talk to me a little bit, and all of us, about why, from a foreign policy standpoint, you find yourself able to endorse Democrats who didn't used to be that way.
Well, it's not just able to endorse them, but if you look at the numbers of the most senior officials who served Donald Trump, his own vice president, national security advisors, as chief of staff, the leading generals who served him, who've all said he's unfit. And people really need to stop and think about how completely unprecedented that is. And the idea, when people sort of say, well, we might, be tempted for some reason or another to vote for Donald Trump. If the issue is foreign policy, I would just ask everyone, think about how dangerous and damaging it is to have someone who's totally erratic, completely unstable, someone who has aligned himself with, who idolizes tyrants. He idolizes tyrants. The choice here with respect to national security policy is a man who has proven, he's absolutely proven that he will not stand up, he won't defend this nation with respect to our own Constitution and rule of law. And Vice President Harris, who has been clear in terms of support for Ukraine, in terms of recognizing and understanding across the board that America cannot maintain our own freedom and security if we walk away from our allies around the world. And our adversaries know that they can play Donald Trump. They absolutely know that they can play him. And we simply can't afford to take that risk. So as someone who's spent a career on national security issues, again, this was not at all a difficult choice for me. The choice here is absolutely clear in terms of the necessity of supporting Vice President Harris.
And if I may emphasize, part of the backbone of our national security is our military. And let's please not overlook how someone who wants to be commander-in-chief and has talked about our servicemen and women, has talked about an American hero like John McCain, who was a prisoner of war, said he didn't respect him, didn't like him because he got caught,
has talked about our service members as though they are less than the most courageous of us, those who put on the uniform, who represent the United States of America, who are willing to die for the sake of everything we stand for. And he calls them suckers and losers. These things cannot be overlooked. And I have said many times publicly, and I'll say it again, in many, many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of him being president of the United States are brutally serious. There are things that he says that will be the subject of skits and laughter and jokes. But words have meaning coming from someone who aspires to stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. These are the things that are at stake.
Couldn't agree more. So I do want to ask you another question, though, before we go to the audience. You talk a lot about a new way forward. You talk about turning the page. What's on the next page? Talk to us about...
you want a preview?
Yeah, give me a spoiler alert, Just tell us what's in the rest of the chapter.
Well, first of all, I will say that it is a metaphor that is meant to also describe my intention to embark on a new generation of leadership. And needless to say, mine will not be a continuation of the Biden administration. I bring to it my own ideas, my own experiences. But it is also about moving past what, frankly, I think has been the last decade of the American discourse being influenced by Donald Trump in a way that has had the effect of suggesting we as Americans should point the finger at one another, in a way that has been using the power of the presidency to demean and to divide us. I think people are exhausted with that, rightly. And it frankly does not lead to the strength of our nation, to tell the American people that we must be suspicious of one another, distrust one another. Yesterday I did a couple of church services, and there's many people here know the parable of the Good Samaritan. And there is, in essence, a piece of that, in my own words, that really requires us, I think, to see in the face of a stranger, to see a neighbor, right? That's spirit. And I think we need to get back to that. The spirit of the American people is such that, we are an ambitious people. We are aspirational. We have dreams. And that is productive. It is not productive of us to be a nation of people who are pointing fingers at one another, who don't understand that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. So that's what I mean about turning the page. And then a new generation of leadership about being ambitious, about all we have yet to do. Part of my economic policy, I refer to it as an opportunity economy, is about investing in American industries while leaving none of our traditional wonderful industries behind, repurposing and retooling the factories that have led to America's success in industry, while at the same time redefining how we are thinking about which worker has the experience and skill to do the job and is qualified, and understanding we shouldn't be falling into a trap that suggests only those with a college degree have the skill or the experience to do the job. So let's look at how we redefine and perhaps even reorder. And in fact, I'm going to start with federal jobs, and then I'm going to challenge the private sector to do the same. Let's look at which of those jobs would benefit from a skilled, experienced worker who perhaps went through an apprenticeship program, not a 4-year college, but still had a 4-year degree in essence. So these are the kinds of things that are about seeing the opportunity of this moment and investing in it. I'll tell you, and I know this is a controversial topic for many of us, I love Gen Z. Because we have Gen Zs in our lives. We have kids who are Gen Zs. It can be complicated, I know. I love Gen Z. These young leaders they're clear-eyed. You know, they've only known the climate crisis. They've only known active shooter drills. I mean, we had fire drills, not our kids, right? But they also, they're so wonderfully impatient. Right? No, really, that's good. That's good. They're ready to get in there. Let's invest in them. So, for example, one piece of my opportunity economy is we got to deal with the reality of where we are right now. The American dream for previous generations was something that people could kind of count on, not so much anymore, in terms of home ownership. We have a housing shortage in America. We have a supply shortage. So part of my plan is, hey, let's be clear-eyed about this moment. Let's invest in the future. And as a devout public servant, I also know the limitations of government. I want to work with the private sector. I have in my career the skills, the breadth, the depth of value in those active partnerships benefit us all. So part of my plan for housing is to actively partner with building developers, with home builders, to create tax credits, to increase the supply of housing in America. My estimate is I think we can actually do it by 3 million by the end of my first term. Part of my approach that is about a new generation potentially of leadership, and certainly a different approach. Most of my career was not spent in Washington, D.C. I say that with pride. In that, most of my career was spent as a prosecutor, but making decisions that had a direct impact on people's lives. I learned at a very young age as a prosecutor that the things that I would do, the swipe of my pen could result in someone having their liberty or not. When I was Attorney General of California, which is, by estimates, the 5th largest economy in the world, I was acutely aware the words I spoke could move markets. I like getting things done. And part of my approach, which is I think about a new generation of leadership, is let's cut through the red tape. Let's cut through the bureaucracy while still knowing the virtues of the work that we can do in the public sector, be it public education, public health, public safety.
This is a perfect segue into our first audience question, which is going to come from Alexandra Miller from Delaware County, main section right there. Hi, Alexandra.
Hello. Hello, Madam Vice President, Representative Cheney.
Hi there.
Thank you for taking my question today. My name is Alex. I have a 7-year-old son and a wonderful 72-year-old mother who is suffering from dementia and requires full-time care. My son is in 2nd grade. My mother is in a nursing home, and I work full-time. The costs of childcare and of elder care are staggering, but simultaneously, professionals that help care for both our children and our elders are generally underpaid, which makes it difficult for them to support their own families and do the jobs that they need to do. How do you propose to help bridge this gap, making both child and elder care more affordable for hardworking families, and also retaining and attracting quality talent for these essential jobs?
So first of all, you're dealing with a lot. You're dealing with a lot. And I just wish you strength and support. You are a part of what we call the sandwich generation, which are those parents and children who are right in the middle. They are taking care of their young children and taking care of their parents as they age. And it's a lot. And so I actually plan to address this in a substantial way because I actually bring a personal experience to it as well. I took care of my mother when she was sick. And that work is the work of trying to cook something that they feel like eating, right? Trying to figure out which clothes will not irritate their skin, help them put on a sweater. It's about trying to figure out how you can say something that brings a smile to their face or makes them laugh. It's about dignity. Meanwhile, you have a 2nd grader
You try and teach that kid how to read. Spending time with them, reminding them they are special and can be anything. And in the middle of all of that, if you are working, or just to have a minute to breathe, it's a lot. It's a lot. So the way that this plays out for many people is it's one of just a couple of ways. One, if you have the good fortune of having enough extra money, you can hire somebody to come in and then, exactly as you said, you, knowing what you just shared with us about yourself, would pay them the value of their work. Or someone in this position would have to basically spend down all their savings so they could qualify for Medicaid, which means they pretty much have to get rid of everything. Or they have to quit their job, which means one less income in their household. And this is a matter, this issue for me is a matter of dignity. Yours, your parents, and the well-being of your child. And you being able to do what you naturally want to do, and the thing that we should value in our society, which is someone like you who is taking on the duty and the responsibility of all of that. So my plan is that instead of those scenarios I just mapped out, we will restructure it so that Medicare covers the cost of in-home health care for your parent so that they can be at home and you can then have the assistance with someone who can help prepare that meal, help them get dressed, and you can still give that baby of yours all the love that they deserve, and you can have sanity in the process, and everyone can have dignity. And so this is my approach, which is let's just look at this as let's just come at it from common sense, by the way. It's just common sense. And what is a common sense practical approach to doing this? Because when you are able to be productive, we all benefit, by the way. When that child is able to have a parent who is able to help them with their reading and remind that child that they are special, we are all going to benefit from that. So thank you for raising the subject. And you take care of yourself.
Okay, next we're going to call on Ashley Scott. Speaking of Gen Z, although I guess I shouldn't assume I know what generation she's from, but she's a student from Bucks County. Hi.
Hi, Vice President Harris and Congresswoman Cheney. My name is Ashley Scott. I'm from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I am Gen Z. I'm 22 years old.
Nailed it.
So thank you for that compliment. But yeah, my question is about maternal health. Specifically in the United States, maternal mortality is devastating. The rates are terrible. And I was wondering if you have a plan to combat the crisis.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for being here and your voice. It's a big issue. So we have the very, I think, shameful distinction of any wealthy nation having one of, if not the highest rate of maternal mortality. And I've studied this issue. I worked on it when I was in the United States Senate and as vice president. And the fact is that 90% of them are preventable, which tells us we can do something about it, right? And it is an issue. So Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth. Native women are like twice as likely. Rural women 1.5 times likely. One of the common threads that you will see in those demographic populations is a lack of appropriate prenatal care, and then care during the term of their pregnancy, and then postpartum care. And we know that when that care is available, they're having a healthier and, by the way, happier experience. And the long-term impact to all of us as a society, much less to that family, is immense. And so the work that we've been doing and the work I intend to do going forward is to address that, right? So, for example, in rural America, the way that the system has been structured, the healthcare system has been structured, is a lot of those hospitals and clinics have had to close because of the way we reimburse based on population size, and as people are leaving rural America, then the hospitals and the clinics can't afford the overhead. I'm oversimplifying, but just to make the point. So we need to address that in terms of how we're structuring, how we create incentives and give the resources to those healthcare facilities, be they clinics or hospitals. The other piece that we have to do is really just talk more about the issue around also how in the healthcare system we are treating women. And are we taking women seriously when they talk about their healthcare concerns? So again, personal experience, my mother had two goals in her life: to raise her two daughters, my sister and I, and to end breast cancer. My mother was a breast cancer researcher. And she was so passionate about women's health care. And I remember it as a young girl and throughout my life. And we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that when she walks into that clinic, that doctor's office, that hospital, that she's taken seriously. And that's also about what we do in terms of training within the profession. It's also about what we do in terms of public education to get information to women so that they know that they are not just complaining and they should not suppress or subordinate what their concerns might be about themselves because they're taking care of everybody else. So there's a lot of work to do, and of course there's a connection between this and what we need to do. Since the Dobbs decision came down, when we are looking at, I've met with a lot of, in particular OBGYNs, who are concerned that there are kids going through, young people going through their medical school who are now feeling deterred from engaging in reproductive health work. And reproductive health work is vast. It is not only about abortion. It is about a whole array of care. And we want to make sure that we're not creating disincentives for people to go into that very, very important profession. And then we also want to make sure that we are in the whole issue of reproductive care, not suggesting to women or the people who love them that they should be judged. Because there is that also when you're talking about reproductive care, where women sometimes are made to feel or do feel embarrassed to talk about their needs as it relates to their reproductive health. And then, of course, I feel very strongly the government should not be telling any woman what to do with her body. And when Congress passes a law reinstating the reproductive freedoms of women, I will gladly and proudly sign it into law because I strongly believe one does not have to give up or abandon their own faith or beliefs to agree that not the government telling her what to do. If she chooses, she will consult with her priest, her pastor, her rabbi, her imam, but not the government. We've seen too much harm, real harm, happen to women and the people who love them around our country since that decision came down, including women who have died. And I don't think that most people who, before the Dobbs decision came down, who had strong opinions about this, I don't think most people intended that the harm that we've seen would have actually happened.
Can I add to this, because I think it's such an important point, and I think there are many of us around the country who have been pro-life, but who have watched what's going on in our states since the Dobbs decision, and have watched state legislatures put in place laws that are resulting in women not getting the care they need. And so I think this is not an issue that we're seeing break down across party lines, but I think we're seeing people come together to say what has happened to women when women are facing situations where they can't get the care they need, where in places like Texas, for example, the Attorney General is talking about suing to get access to women's medical records. That's not sustainable for us as a country, and it has to change.
So as we come close to time here, I want to ask you both kind of a final question. I watched the conversation in the country and the way that the media covers this election, and it's often about the race. Who's up in a poll, who's down in a poll. And and I don't always feel like we're talking about the stakes enough. And Liz Cheney would not be here if she didn't think the stakes were very high. And frankly, the Republicans wouldn't be so angry at you if they didn't think you were an effective surrogate as somebody speaking the stakes.
Some Republicans.
Some Republicans. Hashtag not all Republicans.
I've seen a lot of Republicans. I've seen it, and I know it happens. Who fake her constantly.
I know it.
Yeah.
I know it.
They're going to vote the right way on November 5th. They might not be public about it, but they'll do what they know is right.
But just to close, and maybe starting with you, Congresswoman, so you can have the last word, talk to me and all of us about the stakes. Many people in the room here are undecided voters. What's kind of the last pitch that you would make about why this election is so important and why you believe they should vote for the vice president here?
Well, I think that in this election, and especially here in Pennsylvania, we have the opportunity to tell the whole world who we are. And we have the chance to say, you know, we're going to reject cruelty. We're going to reject the kind of vile vitriol that we've seen from Donald Trump. We're going to reject the misogyny that we've seen from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And we have the chance in this race to elect somebody who you know is going to defend the rule of law. You know Vice President Harris is going to defend our Constitution. We have the chance to remind people that we are a good country. We are a good and honorable people. We are a great nation. And in this race, we have the opportunity to vote for and support somebody you can count on. We're not always going to agree, but I know Vice President Harris will always do what she believes is right for this country. She has a sincere heart, and that's why I'm honored to be here and support her in this race.
Exactly. Listen, so in my career as a prosecutor, you've heard me say this, I never, ever asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Never. It wouldn't even occur to me to ask them. I did every time ask, are you okay? And I feel very strongly that, for example, on the issue of partisanship, yes, we're going to have disagreements, but I actively invite good ideas from wherever they come. That's why I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet, by the way. Because I want good ideas. And by the way, I know it is in our best interest as a nation, in the interest of our strength and our future as a nation. We need a healthy two-party system. We need a healthy two-party system. We need to be able to have these good, intense debates about issues that are grounded in fact.
Imagine.
Let's start there. Wow. Can you believe that's an applause line? But, you know, it's we have in our grasp in these next 13 days, or 15 days, excuse me. I'm just jumping ahead. In these next 15 days, we have in our grasp the ability to determine the course of our country. You know, every election we've said this is the one, this is the one. This truly is the one. I mean, to the Congresswoman's point, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff referred to Donald Trump as being fascist to the core. And no one would ever accuse the former chairman of being partisan in any way. The people who know him best, from the former chief of staff, defense secretaries, two of them,
national security advisor to the former vice president. And so we have in our grasp, because we still have a democracy, as the saying goes, as long as we hold on to it, we still have a democracy. Which means in a democracy, and here's the beauty of it, we each have the power to make a decision about the future of our country through our vote. And my request then of each of you who have spent time out of your busy lives to be here, and I thank you for that, is please just help us get the word out to your neighbors and friends and family members to just remind them of what is at stake in this conversation. I ask for your vote. I ask for their votes. And I promise to be a president for all Americans. I promise and pledge that.
All right, everyone, Congresswoman Cheney and Vice President Kamala Harris, thank you so much. Yes, let's give them another round of applause. That was wonderful.
Today's conversation will be moderated by Charlie Sykes, a longtime radio host here in Wisconsin, whose most recent book is How the Right Lost Its Mind. He now writes for The Atlantic, and last week endorsed Kamala Harris for president. Please welcome Charlie Sykes.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, and welcome to this production of The Odd Couple. Okay, and it really is odd. I never thought that I would be here. You never thought that I would be here. But that's because this is not a normal election. This is not an election between Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. So that's why we're doing this, dogs and cats together in this strange moment. It's why we're having this conversation here in Brookfield, Wisconsin, crucial Waukesha County. But we're not going to be talking about a few things. We're not going to be talking about sharks and electrocutions. We are not going to be going through Tony Evers' 40-minute playlist and swaying to the music. We're not going to be talking about Jewish space lasers or Arnold Palmer's putting game. That's the other event down the road. The reason we're having this conversation, though, is that despite the clownishness, the stakes are so serious. This is election, again, not about the normal divisions in American politics, but about things like decency and democracy, the rule of law, whether or not we're going to shred the Constitution, and whether or not America will continue to be a shining city on the hill to the rest of the world. I don't think our guests tonight need any introduction, so I won't spend some time, but I do want to say this. Political courage is vanishingly rare in our world today. And I know of very few people more courageous than Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney has given up a lot, but she's also inspired a lot of us. And the thing about Liz Cheney to keep in mind is that Liz Cheney knows that January 6th was not a day of love. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Thank you, Liz. And it is my great privilege and honor to introduce to you tonight someone who is here precisely because she believes we have to put country over party, the next President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
And Vice President, welcome back to Wisconsin.
It is good to be back. You know, so Tony Evers, that's funny about his playlist. Is it really that long?
No.
Okay. Every time I land in Wisconsin, almost every time, Tony Evers, the governor, will meet me on the tarmac. And because I did live in Wisconsin when I was 5 years old, every time he will say, "Welcome home." So I do feel and have a connection to Wisconsin and feel a sense
Actually,
of
we all
connection.
have connections to Wisconsin, which makes this event, I think, so important with 15 days to go. So let's just dive right into all of this. There are actually undecided voters out there.
Yeah.
And there are undecided voters here.
Yeah.
People who have never voted for a Democrat, moderates, conservatives who voted for people named Bush and Cheney and Ford and Reagan and Bob Dole.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a throwback, isn't it? But I guess the question is, what is your pitch to them? Why should they do something they've never done before? Why should they cross over party lines and vote for you?
Well, I start from the belief, based on a lived experience, that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us. I also know that you all are here spending time that you could be spending doing a number of other things with all of the obligations you each have. And you are here because we together love our country. We love our country. And we believe in the foundational principles that are at stake in this election. I believe that when we think about who we are as the American people, there is more we have in common than what separates us when we think about what is at stake in terms of our democracy, rule of law, the Constitution of the United States, national security, the standing of our country in the context of the world. All of that is at stake. And I will share with you, Charlie, when I was in the Senate for those 4 years that I was there, my favorite committee was the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I'm going to tell you why. We would walk into that meeting in a skiff, which is a secure room. We'd have to leave our cell phones outside. The press, with all due respect, were not allowed in, no cameras. People would walk in, Democrats and Republicans, take off their suit jacket, roll up their sleeves, and we dispense with who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. We were all Americans. We were all in that room with one singular purpose: to concern ourselves as our highest priority with the security and well-being of the United States of America. I think those things are at stake in this election.
Congresswoman Cheney, you know how hard this is, though. You know how hard it is to break away from tribal loyalty, to do something you haven't done before. So I'd like you to address that as well. Lindsey Graham was on television yesterday saying, what are you, never Trump Republicans, what are you thinking of? How could you possibly do all of this? There are a lot of people who are listening to us who may be disillusioned with what's happening with the Republican Party, but they're afraid of paying the price, because there is a cost to all of that. So what do you say to those Americans?
Well, don't listen to Lindsey Graham, number one. It's good life advice, actually. But what I say is that what undergirds everything that we are as a nation, is the rule of law, and it's our Constitution. And when you look at what Donald Trump did after the last election, when you look at the cruelty that's involved in someone who watches an attack on the United States Capitol, an attack conducted by people in his name, and refuses for over 3 hours to tell the mob to leave, I mean, people just need to think about what that's depravity. He watched the attack happen, and people kept asking him, please tell the people to leave. And law enforcement officers were being brutally beaten, and the Capitol was being assaulted, and he would not tell people to leave for over 3 hours. That cruelty is the same cruelty that we see when he lies about the federal government's disaster response, when he puts people's lives at risk because he won't tell the truth. He's a man who's unfit to be the president of this good and honorable and great nation. And so I've spent a lot of time working before I was elected to Congress in countries around the world that weren't free, or where people were trying to achieve their freedom. And I know how fragile this can be, how fragile democracy can be. And so in this election, we have a choice. We have the choice of somebody in Vice President Harris who you know is going to uphold the rule of law. You know that she's going to lead this country with a sincere heart. You know that she is going to always be thinking about what is best for this nation. We might not agree on every issue, but she is somebody that you can trust and someone that our children can look up to. And I think it's so important for us to cast the vote for Vice President Harris this time around.
You know, Vice President, I was thinking about one of your social media posts recently where you go through all the things that Donald Trump has bailed out of, that he won't debate you, that he won't do interviews, that he's refusing to release certain information. And you asked an interesting question, what is he hiding?
Yeah.
So what in fact is he hiding?
Well, I wonder what is he hiding. I also wonder what his staff is trying to hide by preventing or suggesting he not debate me again, not do these interviews. It is the norm, as you know, that presidential nominees will do a 60 Minutes interview. He has refused to do that. He is pulling out of interviews left, right, and center. And I think that what we see about him in public, whether it be his rallies or, as you said, would it be called just a solo dance? I don't
know that it has I don't think know that has a name to it.
Dance is really generous.
Yes, what that was. I think it does lead us, and it should lead us to observe that he is increasingly unstable. But you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to the people who know him best. The people who worked with him in the White House, in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room. His former chief of staff, 2 former secretaries of defense, his secretaries of defense, his former national security advisor, and of course his former vice president. And they have each talked about, the chief of staff, that Donald Trump has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. Not only has that been said by a former chief of staff of the former president, but we know he has openly talked about his intention to terminate the Constitution of the United States. I have taken that oath 6 times as district attorney, twice, elected and reelected, as attorney general of the largest state in California, twice, as United States Senator, and actually now as vice president. And the Congresswoman and I have talked about that. That is an oath one must take seriously. It is a duty to defend and honor and uphold the Constitution of the United States. He has said he would terminate it. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States should never again be able to stand behind the seal of the President of the United States, having said they would terminate the Constitution of the United States. And again, most recently, the report is that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a decorated general, said of Donald Trump that he is fascist to the core. These are the people who know him best, people who worked with him. And so, yes, we can talk about that moment on stage of the music and all that, but I think it's very important that we acknowledge, and I've said publicly, Donald Trump is an unserious man. And the consequences of him ever being president of the United States again are brutally serious. Brutally serious. To the Congresswoman's point, I have now, as Vice President of the United States, met over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings. Many of them multiple times. We are on a first-name basis. Most of them allies in connection with NATO, and I've met with them in connection with our standing rightly with Ukraine. The world is watching this election, and our allies are worried
Because the reality is that when we as the United States of America walk in these rooms around the world, we walk in chin up, shoulders back, with the earned and self-appointed authority to talk about the importance of democracy and rule of law. And being a role model, this is a room of role models, we know as a role model, people watch what you do to see if it matches up to what you say. One of my very real fears, Charlie, to be candid, is I hope that we as the American people fully understand how important America is to the world. I hope we really, really understand that. Because this is about what will happen to and with us as Americans, but it will impact people around the world.
Let me follow up on that, Congresswoman, because I was on a podcast recently with another pundit who was saying that she was afraid that America was sleepwalking into authoritarianism, that American voters were not sufficiently alarmed. And as the Vice President just said, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff just said that Donald Trump was the most dangerous threat facing the country. Do Americans in this last 15 days, do they understand that, and what has to happen in the next 2 weeks for them to really understand the danger?
Yeah, I think that they think they do. And, you know, one of the things I remind people is that although not every Republican who is casting a vote for Vice President Harris will say publicly that they are, there's clearly, you know, a threat associated with that in some instances. But millions will. And they will do that for a whole range of reasons, but what you mentioned is so important. I mean, when I think about, you know, the first time I ever voted was for Ronald Reagan. I've known presidents well, obviously, particularly I know Vice President well, in addition to Vice President Harris. And I watch how our presidents have operated. And even when there have been presidents that we have potentially disagreed with on issues, they've respected the Constitution. I mean, think about the 2000 election and how close that was, and what Vice President Gore did in his concession speech and in ensuring that we had the peaceful transfer of power. And so I would just urge people, again, you don't have to take my word for it, but look at what the people closest to Donald Trump are saying about him. Look at the testimony of the leaders of his Justice Department, the leaders of his campaign, the most senior officials in his White House. Look at their testimony in front of the Select Committee. You know, they're the ones that told us everything that we know about his plan to overturn the last election, about what he did watching the attack from his dining room. We've never faced a threat like this before, and I think it's so important for people to realize this republic only survives if we protect it, and that means putting partisan politics aside and standing up for the Constitution and for what's right and loving our country more.
Do you think we'll be hearing more from some of those folks in the next 15 days? The generals, the chiefs of staff, the people who really understand exactly how unfit Donald Trump is?
I do. I also think that, you know, that they have been very clear so far. I mean, you've had hundreds of national security officials who served in Republican administrations endorse the vice president. And all of the things that, you know, the fact that these people aren't endorsing, the fact that Vice President Pence was the most loyal person there was to Donald Trump, he won't endorse him because he knows Donald Trump asked him to violate his oath of office. Now, that should also give you a lot of pause about J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is there because he will do what Donald Trump wants, and that makes him a particular danger to the Republic as well.
And I'll add to that point. Understand also what happened in the last few months when the Supreme Court essentially told the former president he will be immune from anything he does in office. So whereas before there was at least some threat of consequence and accountability, That no longer exists, and to the Congresswoman's point, imagine Donald Trump, based on everything we know about him and everything we see now and before, imagine him with no guardrails. Because all of those folks who worked with him before, they're not, those who held him back, who attempted to ensure that he would follow the law, are no longer there. And we have the Supreme Court decision. So the stakes are very high.
Okay, let's go to the audience for some questions. We have some undecided voters who have some questions for you, Madam Vice President. Let's go to Lisa Brockman from Madison. Lisa is a small business owner.
Hi.
Good evening.
Thanks for taking my question. I have a question on reproductive freedom.
Yeah.
And I come from a conservative, Christian, pro-life family. And I was a Republican until Donald Trump's presidency. Like most Americans, I believe in a woman's right to choose. And with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, my 21-year-old daughter now has fewer rights than her mother or her grandmother's. I no longer recognize the Republican Party. They have introduced bills from everything from restricting birth control to bringing homicide charges for abortion. It is such an extreme, radical agenda by any standards. And it seems less about the unborn and more about controlling women. So my question is, what are your thoughts on this extremism, and how can we restore those fundamental human rights that have been taken away from the American women?
Thank you.
So to your point, when Donald Trump was president, he hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe, and they did as he intended. And now there are at least 20 states in our country that have criminalized healthcare providers, to your point. I mean, in Texas, the law provides for prison for life for a doctor, nurse, healthcare provider for doing what they believe is healthcare and in the best interest of their patient. Punishing women, I was actually just this week, just a few days ago, in the state of Georgia with the mother of a young woman who died because of Georgia's abortion ban, and she had to go to another state, and it's a long and very tragic story that did not have to be. And here's how I think about this issue. One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree that the government, these folks in a state capital, much less Donald Trump, should not be making this decision for her. If she chooses, she will talk with her priest, her pastor, her rabbi, her imam, but not the government. And I also have found, though, since the 2 years that the Dobbs decision came down that this happened, I have had conversations with a number of people who were opposed to abortion and remain opposed to it, but did not intend for the harm that we are seeing to happen. And I think as this decision came down and we are seeing the harm, there are more and more people who are agreeing that this should not be the government making this decision for women and their families. And the way that we will address this is eventually Congress needs to pass a law restoring those protections. And we need to agree that in our society, you know, we should not have laws that are treating people in a way that is causing such harm. I'll give you another example of the harm that is going on. I started my career as a prosecutor. I have prosecuted everything from low-level offenses to homicides. But one of the reasons I became a prosecutor is because when I was in high school, I learned that my best friend was being molested by her stepfather. And so I said to her, you have to come live with us. I called my mother. My mother said, of course, and she did. And I made a decision early in my life that I wanted to do the work that was about protecting vulnerable people. There are some of these bans that include no exception for rape or incest. I have specialized in those kinds of cases. And the notion that we would tell A survivor of a crime that is a violation to their body, that they have no right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. I mean, I think that's just unconscionable. I think it's immoral. And so this is one of the issues that is at play. And when this issue has been on the ballot since the Dobbs decision came down, in so-called red states and so-called blue states, the American people have voted for freedom.
Congresswoman Cheney, I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well.
You know, I'm pro-life, and I have been very troubled, deeply troubled, by what I have watched happen in so many states since Dobbs. And I have been troubled by the extent to which you have women who, as the Vice President said, in some cases have died, who can't get medical treatment that they need because providers are worried about criminal liability. You know, we're facing a situation today where I think that it's an untenable one. And I think that as we deal with issues like this one, having a president who understands how important compassion is, who understands that these shouldn't be political issues, that we ought to be able to have these discussions and say, you know what, even if you are pro-life, as I am, I do not believe, for example, that the state of Texas ought to have the right, as they're currently suing to do, to get access to women's medical records. I mean, there are some very fundamental and fundamentally dangerous things that have happened. And so I think that it's crucially important for us to find ways to have the federal government play a role and protect women from some of the worst harms that we're seeing. But again, I just think that if you look at the difference in the way that Donald Trump is handling this issue, you know, Donald Trump at one point called for criminal penalties for women. Now, you know, he's been now trying to you know, sort of be all over the place on this issue, although he expresses great pride for what's happened. And I think the bottom line on this, as on so many other issues, is, you know, you just can't count on him. You cannot trust him. We've seen the man that he is. We've seen the cruelty, and America deserves much better.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. So we have another question. Carolyn Mitchell from Wauwatosa has a question for the Vice President as well.
Hi. I have concerns about the strength and the health of the Medicare and the Social Security system. Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of suggestions for improving or protecting it. Some of them raising the age for full acceptance of Social Security. There's also the idea that we would end the cap on the Social Security tax. There is also the suggestion that we raise the tax rate on both Medicare and Social Security. And of course, the last one is to reduce the benefits. So my question for you is, how can we protect the health of both Social Security and Medicare without reducing the benefits?
Thank you.
So, first of all, thank you for your question. Actually, just today, I believe it was, within the last 24 hours or so, an independent review of Donald Trump's policy on Social Security has indicated that under his policy, Social Security would become insolvent in 6 years. And what I and you and I think most of us know is that we have many, many seniors in our country where their Social Security check is their only form of income. It's everything and the only thing they have to live on, to pay rent, groceries, all of that. And so we must protect Social Security. If you look at Donald Trump's Project 2025, the plan that they have if he is elected or re-elected president, it would attack Social Security, it would attack Medicare. And back to the point about just what is in the interest of dignity. The President of the United States should have as one of their highest concerns the dignity of the American people. And in particular, those who have lived a productive life, who deserve to be able to retire and go into their senior years with the dignity of not worrying about whether they're going to have a roof over their head or be able to eat. So my plan includes what we need to do to strengthen the solvency of Social Security. It includes what we're going to need to do and work with Congress to make sure we're putting more into it. And it cannot be about cutting benefits, because right now those benefits are barely adequate as it is. What we must also do is continue to strengthen Medicare around what we've been working on, which is to allow Medicare to negotiate prescription medication costs for our seniors. So in the last 4 years, we have now capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. This is a huge issue for so many who have otherwise either taken a bus trip to Canada to try and get their prescription medication. You're smiling, you know what I'm talking about. Or not that you have, I'm not suggesting that. Not suggesting that. And we've also capped the cost of prescription medication at $2,000 a year for our seniors. Understanding again that this is a related issue, which is what is causing our seniors to be on the verge of bankruptcy and homelessness, by the way. The other work that we have to do is to deal with home health care and how Medicare is covering that. So part of my plan is right now, the only way that there will be coverage for home health care is, generally speaking, Medicaid, which means that the family or the individual would have to spend down all of their savings to be able to be eligible for Medicaid. And frankly, I think it's just that's wrong, and it's just wrong. You know, I took care of my mother when she was sick, and the work that needs to happen to support our seniors to be able to stay in their home, to be able to live a life with dignity, should include that we will pay attention to the fact that not everybody can afford that help. Not everyone has a family member who can do it. And so my plan includes having Medicare cover home health care work for seniors, so that you can stay in your home, for example, and have someone who can prepare a meal and help you put on a sweater. But the core point being dignity, and understanding that we should not have a society that allows or requires our seniors to go into poverty in order to qualify for the care that they may need, that I think we most would agree should provide.
And we have another question from the audience from Dan. Dan Boberil, who is a retired school teacher, taught at MPS, and now lives in Waukesha. Again, a genuinely undecided voter, I understand.
Thank you.
Come on,
Good
Dan.
evening. What did you say? I was told I was going to be an alternate, so I was a little worried about getting my question. But
take your time. Take your
this
time.
is a question. I actually retired from MPS, but I currently teach, and I teach at a private Catholic school. I'm a Catholic, but I've also been pro-life, pro-choice, depending. But I have 5 daughters, and I think it's my duty to continue with the children I teach as well, to see that we need to respect women. And I've really come to the conclusion that this toxicity that exists is just rather embarrassing. And as a lifelong Republican, who I thought your father would be a great president.
Thank you.
Not to say George wasn't, but I've come to this realization, and it's been very difficult. So my big question was for the future of my children, and also students that I encounter, and try to show that we have to have some kind of civility, like we did back in the 80s when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, of course, could talk about things and solve problems, and now it's trying to get one better than the other. And so I'm just wondering, in your position now, how to convince people like me, who some of my siblings might be questioning what I'm doing here, but I think, like you said, we have to be courageous, and that's what I'm trying to be. And so what do you think we can do in the last 15 days, or you can, or Madam Vice President, what you can do to try to get some of these people to cross over? I know you already said that. Some of them probably won't say who they're voting for, but or something I could take with me to say, this sounds very good, or we ought to at least listen to this.
To reduce the toxicity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that you've really put your finger on something that's so important, and you see it as a teacher. Any of us who are around young children, I see it as a mom. My kids aren't so young anymore, but when they look at how elected officials, and in particular how Donald Trump is conducting himself now, that's not a lesson that anybody would look up to. And I think about it often from the perspective of the men and women who've worn the uniform of our country and who have sacrificed so much for our freedom. All of us have an obligation to be worthy of that sacrifice. And in this in this moment, there are millions of good and honorable people who Donald Trump has just fundamentally betrayed. And I think it's so important for people to think about this from the perspective of, the decision to give somebody the power of the presidency means that you're handing someone the most awesome and significant power of any office anywhere in the world. And you have to choose people who have character, choose people of good faith. The framers knew this. The framers knew that it was so important that, we take an oath, but that also fundamentally you had to have people of character. And Donald Trump has proven he's not one of those people by his actions. So, what I say to people is, look, for us to get back to a time where we are actually having policy debates and discussions and disagreements, we have to protect what undergirds all of this. And what undergirds all of it is the Constitution. And we have to be willing to say, as a nation, we're better than partisanship. And I say this as someone who spent a lot of years engaged in partisan battles. And there are important debates we have to have. But if we allow someone, again, if we give him the power again to, do all of the things he tells us he's going to do. He says he'll terminate the Constitution. He says he'll deploy the military against the enemy within. That is a risk that we just simply can't take as a nation. And I think that, this vote, this election cycle, this time around has to be about so much more than partisanship. And I will just end this by saying, and I also know, because I have spent time with Vice President Harris, because I have come to understand what she believes about how she will govern, that she will be a president for all Americans, that she's committed to listening and committed to having viewpoints, some of which, come from different ends of the political spectrum. And if you think about how you conduct, your life outside of politics, how we all conduct our everyday lives, those are the kinds of people that you trust. Those are the kinds of people you can work with. Like, if you wouldn't hire somebody to babysit your kids, like, you shouldn't make that guy the president of the United States. I mean, that's pretty basic.
Madam Vice President, this question goes to the heart of our discussion tonight, because it is not about politics. It's not about left versus right. We're talking about the culture and the impact, the coarsening of the culture, the way in which we have been taught to fear and hate one another, and how our debates have just devolved into sort of trolling one another. How do we get back from that?
So I think that Dan raised, and Charlie, your point is really also hitting on, we have to tap into and rejoice, frankly, in the spirit of who we are as Americans.
And we are an ambitious people. We have aspirations. We have dreams. We are optimistic by nature. And we, I think, value certain qualities in our leaders. To your point as being a teacher, those of us who are parents or parent in any form, the notion over the last several years coming from Trump and those who follow him, meaning people like who he's running with, not his voters, but just others, the notion that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down is just wrong-headed. I think most of us would agree that the real measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. I think most of us would agree and most of us would agree that it is, when we talk about character, it is the sign of strong character to have empathy, to have some level of concern and care about the well-being of other people, and then to do something about that. And I think there's so much about this election that calls into question whether we are on a track with a Donald Trump as president to actually teach and to show our children our definition of a leader, and is that it? One of the issues that I think has resulted in the kind of toxicity that you've been describing is that he tends to encourage us as Americans to point our fingers at each other. That's not in our best interest. The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. We are stronger as a nation when we are working toward a common goal, at least on the most basic fundamental priorities. And I think in this election, you can look at, for example, how he presents in his events to know that he really does not have a plan for America that is about investing in our future, investing in our children, investing in our economies and new industries, investing in our relationships around the world. It's all about himself and his personal grievances. And do we want a president of the United States who spends full time plotting revenge while they sit in the Oval Office? Or a president who is actually focused on the American people? I would also say as a point that I think the Congresswoman exemplifies in so many ways, the strength of our democracy requires a strong two-party system. It really does. It requires that we have healthy debate, based on, based in logic and fact, and that we debate it out, have good, vigorous debates, have a good fight over policy. That's good for democracy. But not to point our fingers and call each other names over trivial, petty grievances. So I think all of that is at stake in this election, and tapping into the commonalities that we have around some of these fundamental principles, I think, is going to be key.
Well, that's why the stakes are so high, right? Because the presidency is a role model, but America is a role model to the rest of the world.
Yes.
So in the very short amount of time we have left, Congresswoman Cheney, just talk a little bit more about the stakes for the world. We haven't talked about the stakes for the future of Ukraine, NATO, of all the other democracies who are looking to us.
They're so high, Charlie. And, America's safety and security depends upon America leading, and it depends upon allies. Yeah. And when you have someone who is erratic and chaotic and unstable, that puts all of us at risk. I tell people often, I spend a lot of time working on national security issues, and when people that I know in the Republican Party tell me they might be considering voting for Trump from a national security perspective, I ask them, go look at his national security policies. Please go look at them, because what he's proposing in terms of withdrawing from NATO, welcoming Vladimir Putin to attack our NATO allies, he praises Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, and President Xi of China, and Putin of Russia. And if you listen to him, he doesn't just praise those people generally. He praises them for their cruelty, for their tyranny. That's not who we are as a nation. It's not who we are. And the world needs us to be better, and our own security and our own freedom requires that we have a president who understands America has to lead, and that our strength comes both from our greatness and also from our goodness. And that's Vice President Harris.
And just to, thank you. But just as a point of emphasis on this important point, understand that this is an individual, Donald Trump, who is easily manipulated by flattery. And we've seen that. Don't forget he dared to even consider inviting the Taliban to Camp David. Remember all this, the love letters with Kim Jong-un. Let's remember what we just most recently, what was reported. During the height of COVID, Americans were dying by the hundreds a day. Nobody could get their hands on COVID tests. You remember what that was. During that time, he secretly sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin for his personal use. On the issue of Ukraine, he says, oh, well, I'd solve that in a day. Well, I don't think we as Americans think that the President of the United States should solve an issue like that through surrender. And understand that's what would happen. Understand that's what would happen. Vladimir Putin would be sitting in Kyiv if Donald Trump were president. And understand what that means. As so much our allies understand, and that's why they're concerned about this election. If Putin were to get away with invading the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, because America, the leader in bringing the allies together and standing for fundamental international rules and norms like sovereignty and territorial integrity, if Vladimir Putin got away with that, you think he wouldn't march next right into Poland and the rest of Europe? Because Donald Trump wants to please somebody that he considers to be a strong man who he admires? So on this and so many issues, the stakes are extremely high. But I would say this as a final point for now. This is not as much an issue of what we are against as what we are for. And I'll end my point where I started. We love our country, and our country is worth fighting for. And that's how I think of this. Our democracy will only be as strong as our willingness to fight for it. And you all are taking your time out of your lives to be here because we, I think, agree on that among the most fundamental principles at stake. And I thank you for the time you've taken, and I hope to earn your vote, by the way. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And we have 15 days to make a decision. Thank you all for coming here to Brookfield, Wisconsin. Thank you, Congressman Liz Cheney, Vice President Kamala Harris. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. So we are in the closing days of this campaign, and Donald Trump and I have been presenting our closing arguments to the American people. As you've heard me say many times, my pledge to the American people is to pursue common sense solutions, to listen to those, even those who disagree with me, to listen to experts, and to be a president for all Americans. Donald Trump's closing argument is very different. He pits Americans against one another. He spends full time having Americans point their fingers at one another, and he spends a considerable amount of time plotting his revenge on his political opponents. As of last night, just to add more, He has indicated that the person who would be in charge of health care for the American people is someone who has routinely promoted junk science and crazy conspiracy theories, who once expressed support for a national abortion ban, and who is the exact last person in America who should be setting health care policy for America's families and children. And then, even worse, he has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has, about political opponents, and in great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be President of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president. Representative Cheney is a true patriot who has shown extraordinary courage in putting country above party. Trump is increasingly, however, someone who considers his political opponents the enemy, is permanently out for revenge, and is increasingly unstable and unhinged. His enemies list has grown longer, his rhetoric has grown more extreme, and he is even less focused than before on the needs and the concerns and the challenges facing the American people. I have also thought a lot about what this means in terms of our standing in the world. As Vice President, I have represented the United States of America around the world. And what I know is that when we walk in those rooms representing the United States of America, we have the earned and self-appointed authority to then talk about the importance of democracy, the importance of rule of law. And as a result, people around the world who are fighting for freedom and opportunity hold us up as a model. America deserves better than what Donald Trump is offering. America deserves a president who understands our role and responsibility to our people and to the rest of the world to be a model. So I'll end with this. Voters are making their decisions. Many have voted, but there are still those who are making a decision about who they'll vote for. And what I offer is I ask folks to, among the many issues before you, just consider who's going to be sitting in the Oval Office on January 20th. Either you're going to have Donald Trump there, who will be stewing over his enemies list, or I will be there working hard on your behalf on my to-do list. That is the choice among many that is at stake in this election, and I would be proud to earn the vote of the American people, and I do intend to win. With that, I'll take any questions.
Here, AP. President, have you had a chance to talk to Liz Cheney? And then secondly, are you concerned about her general security? And considering the situation and how tense things are, do you think that the government or the administration is some form of provider with security in this situation?
So I've not talked to her since this comment was made, but I will tell you, I know Liz Cheney well enough to know that she is tough, she is incredibly courageous, and has shown herself to be a true patriot at a very difficult time in our country, where, to your point, we see this kind of rhetoric that is violent in nature, where we see this kind of spirit coming from Donald Trump that is so laden with the desire for revenge and retribution. And Liz Cheney is a tough person. She is an incredible American, and I have an incredible amount of respect for her. I think that Liz Cheney is courageous, and that we will always make sure that we are all fighting against and speaking out against any form of political violence.
You spoke about early voting. What is your assessment? What is the data that you're seeing across the battleground?
I'm seeing the folks who are showing up at the various places where we are inviting people to come and talk with us, and where we are talking about the issues at stake, and I'm seeing an incredible amount of enthusiasm from people of every walk of life, every generation, from our first-time voters to folks who are seniors and have a lot at stake on issues like Social Security and Medicare. And what I am enjoying about this moment most is that in spite of how my opponent spends full time trying to divide the American people, what I am seeing is people coming together under one roof who seemingly have nothing in common and know they have everything in common. And I think that is in the best interest of the strength of our nation.
By a lot more women showing up in Pennsylvania, a lot of Democratic women, first-time voters.
Women, men, folks of every background are showing up.
Vice President, you've had quite a lot of interruptions during your speeches recently, a lot of pro-Gaza protesters, and you certainly have spoken about democracy and responding to them, but do you think that you need to say a little bit more about the Mideast conflict, or about what you would do to try to satisfy them? And are you concerned at all about how you'll do in college towns and in Michigan in particular with them? President Trump today is going to Dearborn, is going to a Palestinian restaurant. This is the second kind of Arab American restaurant he's gone to. He seems to be really trying to make a play for a group that would traditionally be pretty democratic. Do you think you've done enough to reach these voters?
Well, I'm very proud to have a significant amount of support from the Arab American community, both because of my position about what we need to do in Gaza and in the region to end the war and bring the hostages home, and my commitment to a two-state solution, but also because within that community there are many issues that challenge folks and that they want to hear about, including what we're going to do to make housing affordable, what we're going to do to bring down the cost of groceries, what we're going to do to invest in small businesses. I have a plan for all of those things, and that is something that resonates within that community and with all Americans.
They want to show the administration that what they did, that the policy and the support for Israel is wrong, and are going to make a statement, and that they don't care if it makes Trump the president. What would you tell them?
So there's a real contrast in this race when you look at who stands for democracy and democratic principles and who does not. Donald Trump is talking about an enemies list. He is talking about using the American military to turn on American citizens. He talks in a way that suggests that there should be retribution and severe consequences just because people disagree with him. My point is very clear. I believe in our democracy. Democracies are complicated in a wonderful way because we like debate. We accept and receive differences of opinion, and we work them out. One of the reasons I am going to have a Republican in my cabinet is because I want different views. I enjoy and benefit from diverse views from different perspectives that allow me then to make the best decisions I can make. That's a big difference between me and Donald Trump. And that's the big difference between someone who truly is a leader and someone who is in it for themselves and wants unchecked power. Okay, thank you all.